Now
Okay.
73 people. Okay, we shall start the talk for today. Title Peranakan Heritage and the We Family of the New Route. Right? Can I hand over to Ronnie Tang Kun Siang to start the talk? Ronnie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you may start the talk.
Okay, thank you, Jerome. Okay, welcome to this hour-long talk about Peranakan heritage and the We Family of New Road. Next slide, please.
Wait, yeah.
Okay, the outline of today's talk is first about 15-minute talk on Peranakan heritage and culture presented by myself. And next will be about the We Family of New Road presented by Nyonya Dawn Marie Lee. And we have a virtual tour of Baba House presented by Nyonya Daniel Sip. And we'll end off with a question and answer session. Okay, next. All right. Now, just a little bit about Genealogy Society Singapore. It was founded in 2012 by Mr. Ng Yu Kang to provide a forum for genealogy enthusiasts to generate interest in genealogy, then to collaborate with various agencies on genealogy. And you can refer our activities to this website here, mentioned here. Thank you. Next, please. Now, a little bit about NUS Baba House. This house was once the home of the We family of New Road, and the founder was Wee Bin, and this house was built in 1895 and is currently managed by the NUS Center for Culture, and it was made possible through a donation by Miss Agnes Tan, the daughter of Tun Tan Cheng Lock. You have guided tours from Monday to Fridays. You can refer to the website on Baba House, NUS EDU SG. You can refer to that. Okay, next, please. Now, I'll start off by talk on Peranakan heritage and culture. This is a picture taken in 1913 of a very prominent family, but I shall not name them for privacy reasons. Okay, next. Okay, about myself, I'm basically Peranakan from my father's side. I'm the 7th generation. From my mother is on the 8th. My paternal ancestor came from Chunmei, from Longhai, from the Haiting, from Jiangsu province of Fujian, China. He left his village around 1776. He traded in Batavia and finally settled down in Malacca around 1795. My DNA is, I've been told, is about 1/3 Malay and the rest Chinese. I was shocked to hear the news, actually. I was born and raised Peranakan, but when we were young, we call ourselves straight Chinese Hokkien Baba. I speak English, Baba Malay, and a bit of Mandarin and Hokkien. I still eat my meals with, I eat rice with my right hand. I love Chinese, Peranakan food, Indian food, Malay food, but not liver and kidney. Okay, next, please. Okay, just this title card. Okay, just a quick disclaimer. Now, this talk is presented by myself to inform the public on a topic of general interest. It does not reflect the opinion of any society or association which I may be affiliated with. And this talk is presented not for profit. Okay? And no copyright infringement is intended on any of the content in this talk. Okay, next, please. Now, when I was growing up, there was a big culture shock. A shock in the sense that, next please. Okay, this culture shock was when I was a young adult, I was told that we are classified by the general Chinese mainstream that we are orang Cina bukan Cina, which means you're Chinese but yet not Chinese. Okay. Now at school, I studied Chinese primary school, but in secondary school I switched to Malay, and the cikgu used to scold me and say, you have to speak pure Baba Malay because you're learning Malay, Bahasa Kebangsaan, okay, Malay, not Baba Malay, okay. Now in the bus, when I was in school, I used to get scolding for not being able to speak Chinese, especially Hokkien those days. Okay, next please. Now, today I will cover three main areas, the Peranakan heritage. One, existence, material culture, and social standing. All right, next please. Now, who is a Peranakan? Many have tried to use a checklist approach to determine if one is a Peranakan or not. I find that this approach is not useful at all. It's better to understand how the Peranakans came about. So I will focus now on the Melaka Chinese Babas from which my ancestors settled down in Malacca. Next, please. Now, the origins of the Peranakan Chinese. The majority of Peranakans are Chinese, but they're also Indian, Muslim, Eurasian, Tamil, Indian Peranakans in Penang, Malacca, Singapore, Indonesia, and maybe also in Vietnam and the Philippines. Now, the men are called Babas and ladies Nyonyas. This specifically for the Babas in Malacca. There is a protocol also, a whole wide protocol for how to address your relatives. For example, we call our eldest uncle Tuaku. Next, please. Okay, the origins of the Peranakan Chinese. Now, way back around the 12th century or even before that, there were already Chinese traders traveling out of China to seek trading opportunities. Now, I also want to emphasize that the legend of the Princess Hang Lipo is still an unproven myth. Okay, so we can still talk about it. It's still a legend. Chinese communities have already developed during the following periods, from the time of the Malacca Sultanate from 1400 right up to 1957. Okay, of course, the number of Chinese in Malaya increased many times over the period from 1400 to 1957. Okay, next please. Now, the origins of Peranakan Chinese, the third chapter. During all these periods mentioned, the pockets of Chinese communities existed in the Malay archipelago. We will see the map in the next slide. Okay, now next slide, please. Okay. No. Okay. Currently the next slide before, please, Jerome. No. Okay. Now, up to the British occupation in we started in 1795. The Chinese traders visited Malacca to trade, but some remained and married local women. Now, local women, this is a very important definition which most of you should remember. Now, local women in this context are generally thought to be Batak and Balinese women or even Bugis. Now, a lot of them came as slave labor from Sumatra and Java, respectively. They were most likely not Muslim. Okay, so my ancestors, the woman carried the DNA of these local women. Next, please. Now, you see a map of the Malay archipelago. From Malaya on the left, Sumatra below, just Java, you have Borneo, you have Sulawesi, and you have the Philippines on top. Okay, further up, you even have Vietnam, Laos, Indochina, that area. That also was the site of many small Chinese communities, which have grown even larger today. Okay, next, please. Now, the Peranakan Chinese communities today, they are the result of centuries of interaction between Chinese traders and local women, resulting in Peranakan communities being established in these areas. Singapore, Malacca, Penang, Sarawak, Java, Sumatra, Riau Islands, Phuket. There are also small communities in the UK, Netherlands, Australia, USA, etc. Okay, next, please. Okay, now we have this endogamy, which is a very unique marriage arrangement, which happened between the Babas from roughly the period of the late 1700s to till about around the period after the Second World War. Okay, now this the Baba Malays, they cemented ties between their families and business partners through marriage arrangements. These were all called arranged marriages. Now, they arrange marriages between their children or their cousins. So as time went on, many of the cousins married the cousins. So in my own family, there's evidence that cousins married cousins for a couple of generations. Now, these endogamic practices serve to make the Peranakan community very homogeneous and a very close-knit one. Now, as they used to say, satu kentut, satu kampung boleh bau. Okay. Now, homogeneity promoted a similar language, similar social practices, customs and manners, cooking recipes, dressing and housing arrangements. Next, please. Now, you see here a photograph of my grandfather and his wife. They are both cousins, and grandpa lived opposite his cousin. Now, he was English educated at Malacca High School. His friends enjoyed much social activity, and they serve a lot of public service. And like other Babas of his time, they adopted English lifestyle, but retained Chinese customs, religious practices. But the important thing is that he could not read Chinese and could not speak Chinese. Okay. In addition, he also married a secondary wife who was a lady from Hong Kong. Next, please. Now, the Peranakans today, when I was growing up in the 1950s, we identified ourselves as Baba or Nyonya, never Peranakan. During the Straits Settlements period from 1826 to 1946, the term Straits-born Chinese was used. Usage of the term Peranakan, meaning local born, became popular after the early 1960s when the Peranakan Association was renamed from SCBA to TIPAS. Next, please. Now, the Peranakans today, in the context of nationality, we claim ourselves as Singaporeans, Malaysians, or Indonesians of Chinese origin. In terms of demographics, we are classified as Chinese. So my identity card classifies me as Chinese. As more young Babas and Nyonyas marry outside the family circles, now they marry non-Babas and non-Nyonyas, so they marry Hokkiens, Teochew, Hainanese, Cantonese, etc. So the continuity of the Peranakan culture has started to dwindle very dramatically. Now, the generation after me can probably no longer speak fluent Baba Malay because it's no longer relevant. Now, they can't even speak dialects now. They don't cook the same food. They seldom wear kabaya, and nor they practice ancestral veneration. Okay, next, please. Now, for the future, I would contend that culture is what a community makes of it. If you decide to speak Hokkien, so be it. If you want to speak English at home, so be it. So many of our Peranakans speak English and Malay at home. Okay, but I can foresee that in the next generation, many of our Peranakans can also speak Mandarin. Okay, so the question of this very strong question of am I a Peranakan, which is frequently asked, is no longer relevant today. Okay, it's no longer relevant. Many Peranakans in Singapore identify themselves as Singaporeans first, Peranakans second. Okay, now the same with my Malaysian cousins. Now, if you decide to eat bok keluak but not practice ancestral veneration, it is up to you. It is your own culture, but you can still claim to have Peranakan roots. Okay, next, please. Now, this is a picture of a modern Peranakan family. He was born in 1935. He is currently he's married to an Australian lady, and his children still regard themselves as Babas and Nyonyas. And the lady, the grandmother lady you see sitting down, she was an expert at sewing and needlework. Some of you might recognize her. Next, please. Now, as time goes on, many customs and manners have disappeared because of increasing globalization and intermarriage among all the different dialects. Now, once when we used to soja, we used to kneel down before our parents during Chinese New Year. Many no longer do so. And I remember even when I was punished by my father, I got caning and I had to kneel before him. Also, the original Malacca Babas, just as a matter of tradition, they did not bring oranges when visiting relatives, but many of them do it now, okay? Even the traditional red paper ang pao is being replaced by the electronic e-hong pao today. Okay, maybe also because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, greeting an elder relative is a very important aspect in our culture and is still practiced today, but it's gradually losing usage. Now, the Babas are also considered very rude not to teriak or greet your parents or older relatives when meeting them. So, for example, when you come home, you say, Mommy, I'm home already, but Daddy, I'm home already, something like that. Okay. Now, when you meet your uncles outside, say, Kuse, how are you? Okay. This is called having good manners. Okay. Next, please. Now, over time also, many superstitions have disappeared. And as many of us know, the Babas and Nyonyas practice 1,000 superstition. They call Pantang Seribu. Now, this is something which is already going away in the past. Also, the religious beliefs of Peranakans tend to be secular. My mother used to go to the church. She used to go to the temple. She used to go to the kramat. Now, ancestral veneration, which was once regarded as a must-have in Peranakan culture, is today not so common anymore. Okay, because partly some Peranakans have become Christians. Okay, it is also a paradox to many outside the Baba community that we are very Western in outlook. Some of Chinese scholars are more Pai, and then but we still remain very Chinese in mindset. Next, please. Now, Peranakan food culture is very important. Most of us are very cherish our very dear baklava, etc. Now, but it's to be remembered that different families have and regions have different variations. So we respect those variations. Now, we also insist on using fresh ingredients and meticulous preparation. So if you learn how to cook from your mother, you probably get a lot of scolding before you master the recipe. Now, the final taste, as my mother used to say, is your tongue. The tongue will determine how tasty your Peranakan food is. Now, Peranakan food is very difficult to successfully replicate. Okay. Now, today you have a lot of Peranakan restaurants who claim to prepare Peranakan food, but I can tell you the best Peranakan food is always prepared at home, which will take a few days to prepare, sometimes 3-4 days, and involves many people to prepare all the ingredients and to cook them. Next, please. Now, this is a picture of my mother doing stir fry with a collie. And next to her is my auntie, Ang Kim. She was also a fabulous cook, just like my mother. Okay, next, please. Now, these are the popular dishes, some of them. Ikan asam pedas. Next, please. And then the popia. This was rolled by myself. I'm very proud of my rolling technique. Thank you. Next, please. Then the laksa. Okay, laksa is mixed with coconut milk. Now the Penang version has got the sour taste, which is just as nice. Next, please. And this is also the most fabulous baklava. Okay, originated from Indonesia, but cherished by most of us in the Baba community. Next, please. Now the Peranakan language. Now this language is very important to us. But unfortunately, my generation is probably the last to speak this. Now, this kind of Malay was based on the lingua franca of the region when they use it for business. Now, in Singapore and Melaka, there are more Malay and Hokkien words. In Penang and Phuket, you have more Hokkien with Malay words. In Peranakan communities in Indonesia, like they call the Peranakan Tionghoa, they also have a similar kind of language. Now, today, as English and Mandarin become the common language of business in Singapore and other regions, fewer people speak Baba Malay. So it's become less relevant. Next, please. Okay, language time cycle, very quickly. When we came from China, we spoke Hokkien. Then gradually, over a few generations, we spoke Baba Malay. And then later evolved to English and Malay. And currently today, we speak English, Mandarin, and some Malay. Okay, next, please. Now, this gentleman here was the doyen of Peranakan culture. At 81, he's probably the last of the fluent Baba Malay speakers. Okay, his command of the language is unmatched. Okay, we consider him a guardian of the Malay, Baba Malay. Next, please. Okay, this gentleman, William Gui, he compiled the first and only Baba Malay dictionary. He's still considered the gold standard of Baba Malay. Next, please. Now, ancestral veneration, this is very relevant for some families who are still Taoists or Buddhists, but today some of them are Christians, so they do not carry on the ancestral veneration. Okay, next, please. Now, you will find in the marketplace, there are many people trying to use the label Peranakan. So you find Peranakan coasters, if you see a photo there, Peranakan sauce, Peranakan buns, Peranakan nanny services, Peranakan perfume, tea, etc., etc., etc. Okay, we even have Peranakan towel, Peranakan houses. Okay, okay. Next, please. Now, dress is also important. Now, because today, most of us have adopted a Western dress, but we still use traditional sarung kebaya and the batik shirt for events. Okay, now the croissant has no longer relevant, because if you don't wear your baju panjang or your kebaya, you don't use a croissant anymore. So many of them keep this valuable croissant in the bank, only to bring them out for events. Now, in the pre-war days, the men used to wear baju lok chuan. And after the war, many of them use a Western shirt or the batik shirt for events. Next, please. Now, this is a picture of my great-great-great-grandma. Now, she spoke Malay and probably Hokkien also. And this picture was probably done up in 1860 or so, judging from her age. Now, she wears a Ming Dynasty robe. Now, this was the forerunner before you have the baju panjang. Okay. Now, in her right hand, she holds a rui. It shows that she was from a family that of high social standing. And incidentally, she was born in Malacca in 1800. Okay, I have donated this portrait to the NUS Museum. Next, please. Now, these are my Nyonya relatives. On the left, one distant auntie or grand auntie. In the middle, my mother and my aunties in 1946. And the third one is my cousins currently. This picture taken in 2010. This is the current kind of dress we wear for the ladies. Next, please. Now, this is the Baba dress which were worn by the men around 1880. And next, you see my uncle, my two uncles in 1980. So you can see the difference in the dress. Next, please. Now, identity is social standing. Now, the Peranakans were already present here as elite merchants in Singapore when they were invited by Stamford Raffles, who got his assistant, Colonel Farquhar, to bring them from Malacca to Singapore. Many of them were invited over. So many of them became successful merchants and they enjoyed esteemed positions in society. Now, these Baba merchants were encouraged to Singapore to kickstart the Singapore economy from 1819 onwards. Now, the golden age of the Peranakan in Singapore and Malaya was from the period around 1830 to 1930s. Now, by 1959, we've got independence. So the Peranakan community, after a lot of interaction and assimilation, they had declined in economic and social influence. Now, today, this assimilation is still going on. Many Babas and Nyonyas marry outside the community. They marry. So today, there's some confusion about identity. Okay, thank you. Next, please. Now, this is a picture of very well-known Babas. On the left, Tan Kim Seng. We have Tan Kim Seng Road in Singapore. And we have Tan Tock Seng. We have a hospital named after him. He founded the hospital. Now, Tan Cheng Lock is a very famous man who had agitated together with Tengku Abdul Rahman to have independence in Malaysia. And so they achieved independence for Malaya in 1957. And we also have Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, the late Lee Kuan Yew, who was our Prime Minister of Singapore. And his son, Lee Hsien Loong, is currently our Prime Minister. So we have two Babas who are Prime Ministers of Singapore. That's very great. Okay. I think that's the last slide. Is that the last slide, Jerome? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Nyonya Dawn Marie Lee, okay, who will present a talk about the Wee family of Neil Road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. Hi, welcome everybody. So today I'll just give you a short presentation on the Wee family. This may be of particular interest to those of you who are interested in the genealogy of the pioneer Singapore Peranakan families. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit about myself. I have been a docent at the Baba House since 2015. And I very much enjoy researching Peranakan culture. I also contribute to the community as the editor of the Peranakan magazine. Next slide, please. Now, so to set the stage for our talk today, I'll tell you a little bit about the neighborhood and the period in which this family came to Singapore. The Wee family's fortune is really tied to the development of Singapore as an entrepot, meaning goods from all over the world were shipped here and reshipped to other places. This was especially important from 1869 when the Suez Canal opened. A lot of trade came in from Europe. So they were among the first pioneer Peranakan families with ties to Malacca, Penang, Palembang, and China. And you can see these are different places where there are also Peranakan communities, of course, except for China. Now, the area in which the Baba House is set, which was once the home of the Wee family, is known as Blair Plain. And in the late 1800s to the early 20th century, it was known as the Millionaire's Row because this was home to many wealthy Peranakan merchants. Simply because Chinatown by that time had become overcrowded, and so the wealthier families moved out, and also because it was close to the port. Most of them had trade and ships coming in, so it was a very short carriage ride away to check on their goods. The fellow Babas who live on the same street as the Wee family on Neil Road in the picture you see here include Lee Hoon Leong, Lee Kuan Yew's grandfather, and the rest of them that I've named here. Next slide, please. So some of you may find this really interesting. This is the family tree of the Wee family. Chua Long Chong, a familiar name to some of you, was the first Kapitan Cina of Singapore. He was the son of Chua Su Cheong, who was the Kapitan Cina of Malacca. And as Ronnie presented in his slide earlier, the rich Malacca Baba merchants were invited by Raffles after the founding of the colony of Singapore to come and live, work, and help to govern the Chinese population in Singapore. Next slide, please. So the Wee family actually had their origins in Singapore with this man here. His name was Wee Bin. He came to Singapore from Fujian in the mid-1800s. And he was a very industrious young man. Although he was not from a wealthy family, he worked for Keong Kong Tuan, who was a wealthy Penang merchant who also had business interests in Singapore. Keong Kong Tuan had many opium and spirit farms at Pearls Hill and Chin Swee Road. And in the past, these farms were actually tendered by the government. That means they were government-owned tenders and left to a merchant to manage. During the 1800s, opium was very, very lucrative. Almost 80% of the Straits Settlement's income at one point came from opium trade. So because he was so good in his job, Keong Kong Tuan let Wee Bin marry his daughter, Chong Lien Kin, who was the granddaughter of Chua Chong Long, Singapore's first Kapitan Cina. They had one son and one daughter. And he also married a second wife after his first wife passed away. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about Wee Bin. He started a shipping company called Wee Bin & Co., which was located at Market Street. And later on in the 1800s, later part of the 1800s, it had become the largest steamship company in Singapore. His ships sailed between Singapore, Bali, the Riau Islands, Lombok, Palembang, and other trading outposts in the Dutch East Indies. And he also had the largest import of Balinese products and earthenware. Earlier in Ronnie's slide, he mentioned that some of the early wives of Peranakans were actually thought to be Balinese and Batak slaves. And this shows us a link there because there were trade routes between Singapore and Bali at that time already. There was also a tin mining boom in Malaya. So a lot of migrant workers were needed in Malaya, and his ships brought workers from Shantou and Xiamen to the Strait settlements. Now, Wee Bin's daughter married Lim Ho Pua, and who was also his employee in Wee Bin and Company. He died at 45, and I must tell you that it's very peculiar that all the men in the Wee family died at a very young age, as you'll see later in my slides. Next slide, please. This is the second wife of Wee Bin. Her name is Tan Kiao. Unfortunately, we do not have any images of his first wife, Kiong Kian Lin. She was also from Malacca. Her family had been established already for several generations, and so she was a Nyonya. And I'm showing you her portrait because when you go to the Baba house, you will see her ancestral portrait hanging in the ancestral hall next to Wee Bun Tek's, which was her stepson. Wee Bin and Tan Kiao had no children. Next slide, please. Now, the family fortune of the Wee family was made really from shipping and steamships. They had so many steamships, actually a fleet of 20, that they were very well known. This is a quote by George Murray Reith, who was a Presbyterian pastor in the 1800s, and he was an observer of colonial Singapore. So he said that when he went down to the harbour, he would see the familiar blue and red flag of one of Wee Bin's steamships. Again, this was another sign that Wee Bin's ships were so well known. Next slide, please. This is one of the ships of Wee Bin and Co., the SS Hai Leong. This little story over here will give you an idea of how trade ties were so close-knit in the Peranakan community. This steamship was actually built for another Peranakan trading company. I think it was called Kyong Yong. And then later on, Wee Bin and Co. bought it over. The shipping schedules of 1886 in the Straits Times show that Wee Bin and Co. used it to service routes between Singapore, Surabaya, Bali, and Makassar. Later on, he sold it to Tan Kim Seng, another fellow Baba, and Tan Kim Seng's company sailed it between Singapore and Penang. Then later on, when the Straits Steamship Company was found, which is now the predecessor of Keppel Corp, this ship was sold to them, and their directors included Babas Lee Cheng Yen, Tang Jiak Kim, and Tan Kiok Seng. You might know these names because you've seen roads named after them in Singapore. Next, please. Next slide, please. So this is Wee Bun Tek, who was the son of Wee Bin and Kiong Lian Kin. He expanded his father's business because his father died very young, at 45. Unfortunately, he did too. But before he did a lot of good work. He was a philanthropist and he served on the communities of Tan Tock Seng Hospital and Po Leong Kuk, which was a society for the protection of women and children. So he donated what was equivalent to 80,000 today to Tan Tock Seng, and they named a ward after him. And also, I'd like to bring your attention to his ancestral portrait. As you can see, he's dressed in the imperial coat. You might wonder why a Chinese businessman in Singapore has a Qing rank. Well, during those times, it was not uncommon for Chinese businessmen to obtain a Qing rank. Jerome, could you please go back to the slide with Wee Bun Tek?
Sorry, I'm finding out who is making noise.
Thank you.
Yeah, can the audience please mute yourself? Because I muted everyone and then like someone going to mute yourself.
I can see some people have not been muted.
Yeah, can the audience please kindly mute yourself and refrain from unmuting? Yeah, thank you.
So I was talking about his robes. Compare this to the robes that Ronnie's great-great-grandmother was wearing. Now, she was dressed in Ming robes. And during her time, some Peranakan Chinese donned Ming robes as a sign of rebellion because their ancestors had left China in defiance to the Qing court. However, by the time of Wee Bun Tek's time, merchants actually felt that it was prestigious to have a rank of the Qing court. In this ancestral portrait, which hangs in the Baba house, he has a Mandarin square with a wild goose in the center. And this tells us he had the 4th scholarly rank of the Qing court. Now, Boon Teck Road in Balestier is named after him. Next slide, please. So Wee Boon Teck married An Cheng An Nyo, and she's believed to be from Palembang. We know this because in the Baba house, we have 2 wedding baskets styled from Palembang. They're called tenongs, and they do not look at all like the bako sia that the Chinese wedding baskets we see from Malacca. They had 3 children, a son, Wee Siang Tat, and 2 daughters. Now, the family fortunes of the Wee family were expanded not because of their industrial men only, but they had the great fortune of marrying very industrious, hardworking, and clever son-in-laws as well. So Lee Chun Guan married one of Wee Boon Teck's daughters, and Lim Peng Xiang married his other daughter. Both were founders of banks, the Chinese Commercial Bank, and Lim Peng Xiang founded the Ho Hong Bank. Later on, both these banks merged to form OCBC Bank, which we still know today. So this is how the family fortunes were tied to the development of Singapore. This Wee Boon Teck, like his father, died very young. He was only 38. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, the sons-in-law were very important in the development of the family fortune. These 3 men, I'll introduce you to them in the following slides. Next, please. So Lim Ho Pua worked for Wee Bin, and just like Wee Bin, he married his boss's daughter. It seemed to be a common trend in those days because families with rich families with daughters and no sons would actually groom their employees and then find that they are suitable, and then they'll let them marry their daughters. Because in Peranakan matchmaking in the past, in fact, status and wealth were not the most important things. They believed that the pa zi or the puek ji was the most important thing in finding a suitable match for your son or daughter. So if their pa zi matched, they would actually make the marriage. Now, Lim Ho Pua became a very respected figure in community. Not only did he work for Wee Bin and Co, because he outlived the Wee men, Wee Boon Teck and his son, he kind of inherited Wee Bin and Co. He was also the director of Tan Kim Ching's Tanjong Pagar Dock Company. He was on the Chinese Advisory Board and the Justice of Peace, and he lived till the ripe old age of 73. Next slide, please. Lee Chung Guan, a familiar name to many of you here, was the son of a wealthy Malacca merchant, Lee Cheng Yen. He was the son-in-law of Wee Boon Teck, and he founded the Chinese Commercial Bank. Again, he was very well known for his enterprise, and he was very generous towards charity and schools. And he donated to Raffles College what is equivalent to 1.8 million today, as well as to the Methodist College. He was a director of the Straits Steamship Company and also a prominent member of the Singapore Chinese British Association, which is the predecessor of the Peranakan Association Singapore. Famously, in the First World War, a period where the Straits Chinese were known to strongly support the British government, he and his brother-in-law Lim Peng Xiang bought and donated a warplane to the British Army in 1915. Next slide, please. Lim Peng Xiang was another famous son-in-law of the Wee family. He was a son-in-law of Wee Boon Teck. And interestingly, his father, Lim Ho Pua, had married Wee Bin's daughter. Now, so Lim Peng Xiang was born in Amoy, and he came to Singapore to join his father. But because he had not a good grasp of English, he was sent to St. Joseph's Institution to work as soon as he arrived, to study as soon as he arrived here. And then he joined his father at Wee Bin and Co. By this time, his father was already running the company because both Wee Bin and his son had passed away. He became a community leader, and the bank that he founded also merged with Chinese Commercial Bank to form OCBC. He was one of the presidents of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce and also a philanthropist. Next slide, please. So this is a tomb of Lim Peng Xiang and Wee Guat Chu. Many thanks to our Vice President of the Society, Raymond Goh. He and his team of brownies have done a lot of work uncovering tombs of the early pioneers in Bukit Brown. And for Lim Peng Xiang, there was something very interesting about his burial, because although he was interred with his wife, his will stated that he wanted to be exhumed and send his ashes back to Amoy, China, which was his birthplace. So that was done in 1944. Next slide, please. So Wee Siang Tat, who was the son of Wee Boon Teck, we do not have any images of him, but these were his two wives. Like all his forefathers, unfortunately, he died very young at 26. Now, his first wife, you see in the picture here with the gigantic croissants, was Ho Siok Chu Nyo. And she became the executor and administrator of the Wee family fortune after Wee Siang Tat died, because his son Wee Eng Cheng, with his second wife, Goh Bo Tan, was only 6 years old. So Wee Siang Tat was a very gifted musician and violinist, and he was in the Chinese Philomathic Society with Lim Boon Keng. Next slide, please. Wee Eng Cheng was the son of Wee Siang Tat and Goh Bo Tan, his second wife. Now, Wee Eng Cheng's story is important because it is his grandmother who bought him the house on Neil Road in 1910. And that is how the NUS Baba House came into the Wee family. Okay, his grandmother bought him this house because it was important for the male heir to have a property of his own to house the ancestral altar and the tablets. Now he married Ang Peng Nyo, who was thought to be a relation of his grandmother, and had a second wife, Lim Ah Mui. He was also a director at both the Chinese Commercial and Ho Hong banks, and again, he died very young at 34. He left behind many properties and cash of about $1.5 million today. So his mother, Goh Bo Tan, and his uncle, Lim Peng Mao, were appointed as trustees of his estate. Next slide, please. This is the tomb of Wee Eng Cheng in Bukit Brown. Thanks again to the good work of Raymond and his brownies. It's a twin grave with his first wife, An Peng Nyo, and his second wife, Lim Ah Mui, actually died at the ripe old age of 95 in 1999. Next slide, please. Wee Sek Hock was the son of Wee Eng Cheng and Lim Ah Mui. He was just 6 years old when his father died, and he lived on the third floor of the house with his family. The family, by this time, owned 3 houses around Neil Road and Everton Road, as well as other properties elsewhere in Singapore. Interestingly, the main residence, which is the Baba House today, did not house the family's staff and servants. The Balinese drivers and the vehicles were housed in a property behind, which is today number 20 Everton Road. They also raised poultry under a dry space under one of the houses. I find this very interesting because although they were such a wealthy family, they thought it was important to raise chickens and ducks. And this also shows you how thrifty and frugal some of the families could be, and probably this is how they made their fortunes. He married Wee Ah Kiao and had 2 sons, Wee Lin and Wee San. And later on, he actually removed his mother and his uncle as trustees because when he came of age, he wanted to take over the family inheritance and to manage it for his 2 sons. He passed away in 1972 at the age of 54. Next slide, please. Now, I want to touch on this, which is a Boyanese Pontok, because around Everton Road, where I mentioned there were many wealthy Peranakan families, they usually had Boyanese or Balinese staff. They were drivers or gardeners, and they lived in houses around the neighborhood that were actually owned by some of the families. So this is an illustration done by Hadi Osni, who has researched extensively into his own heritage. And as you can see, this is an illustration of the Chua Kim Kiat garage, which is still there today, but it's a building, it's not a garage anymore. The men would actually have a little prayer hall below. And then in the front, the cars would be parked there. And above were his living and sleeping quarters. Okay, next slide, please. Is that the last slide? Yes. Now, so we come to the 6th generation of the Wee family, and this is Wee Lin, the current generation. He lived in this house as a child, and he was also a philanthropist like his forefathers, and he started the Sun Love Home for Mental Patients. Today, he cares for over 500 residents, and he was named as one of the philanthropists of the year. He and his brother, Wee Sun, sold the house to NUS in 2006, and it was actually Tun Tan Cheng Lok's daughter, Agnes Tan, who made it possible for NUS to acquire the house. She donated the money in her father's name because she wanted the house to be a place where people could learn about the Peranakan heritage and culture. Thank you so much. Now, Danielle Sim, the outreach manager of the house, will give you a virtual tour.
Thanks, Dawn. So yes, we will now play a video of the virtual tour within the NUS Baba House.
Hold on, Daniel. Sorry, I need to adjust the stuff here. Yeah. I need to stop share my.
Yeah, and let me get permission to share also.
Yeah, I stopped sharing already, and then let me see what's. And then let me find the buttons. Can you share now? Yeah, try.
Okay.
You may also share the link in the chat box below. So because I'm going to stop the live streaming to protect the property rights. So just a reminder, sorry, pause a while.
I'm Danielle, and I work in.
Yeah, so just a reminder, this video is a copyright under NUS Baba House. So no Photoshop or